Broadcast with your host, Dr. C. Guy Robinson, where we are all about therapeutic theology for the spirit, soul, and body. Let's get into today's discussion with the spirit in mind. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Spirit in Mind broadcast. We're going to be talking today about a really relevant subject. We're going to be talking about the psychology of pandemics. Of course, we are praying and in a posture of prayer, and everyone is dealing with the reality of this COVID-19 coronavirus situation. And it is important for us to know that epidemics and pandemics are really psychosomatic or mind-body experiences. It can place both the mind and body in potentially vulnerable positions. And not only are there physical symptoms of disease, but there are also psychological responses and sociological impacts. It affects families, and knowledge of our personal, interpersonal, and collective thought patterns and behaviors is critical to the management of this contagion. And so we have some exciting guests with us today, and I want to introduce my new co-host who will be joining us in future. And from this point forward, I'm excited about this broadcast today, but we have a song of preparation that comes to us by Kevin Lemons. And of course, we believe that even in times like these, just a little can go a mighty long way.
Come on, I need everybody to put your hands together on this tonight. We got a little Sunday morning song we want to sing for you. Hallelujah. It just says just a little prayer and faith. It goes a mighty long way. Come on, put your hands together as we sing it. Come on, choir. Wow. Just a little prayer and faith goes a mighty long way. Just keep the faith each and every day. Rocking up and down the street, telling everybody you need. Just a little prayer and faith. Just a little prayer and faith goes a mighty long way. I think that's simple enough. Come on, sing it again. Just a little. Just a little prayer and faith goes a mighty long way. Goes a mighty long way. Just keep the faith. Oh, each and every day. Walking up and down the street, telling everybody you need. Put a smile on your face, just a little. You should have it by now.
Yeah, you should have it by now. Just a little prayer and faith goes a mighty long way. Welcome again to the Spirit in Mind, and I want to get right into the discussion. But first, I want to introduce the exciting guests we have with us today. First one is a member of the Tabernacle. I'm so blessed by her ministry, but she is a professional woman of faith. And I'm going to ask Ms. Maxine Galloway to introduce yourself. Say hi to the people, if you will.
Hi, everybody. This is Maxine Galloway coming to you. I am currently a psychiatric rehabilitation program director at Redeem Healthcare Medical Systems. And I've worked in the field of mental health for quite some time now after completing my master's at Johns Hopkins University. And I've been working in addictions with carceral populations and women and children in particular. And so I've been doing this for quite some time, and I just had an interesting perspective to bring to you this morning.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so blessed to have you on Spirit in Mind, and I am so grateful for this man of God and man of profession whom the Lord connected our paths by divine providence. And Dr. Shepard, would you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to be with you all on this afternoon. My name is Jonathan Shepard. I am a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist practicing here in the city of Baltimore. I am the Chief Medical Director of Hope Health Systems. That's who I'm employed through. And I'm also an ordained elder in the Church of God in Christ. So it's just good to be with you all and looking forward to continuing with the discussions on this great show.
Yes, yes. And we're, again, welcome, Dr. Shepherd, and welcome, Matt Galloway. And we are so great that you, so blessed to have you with us today. And we want to talk, of course, about this coronavirus pandemic. And the CDC defines a pandemic as an epidemic that is occurring worldwide or over a very wide area, crossing international boundaries and usually affecting a large number of people. And of course, that declaration has been made as it concerns the coronavirus that has now been recognized as a pandemic. In fact, we have a brief statement from the director of the CDC that we want to play as we get into the discussion.
WHO has been assessing this outbreak around the clock, and we're deeply concerned both by the alarming levels of spread and severity and by the alarming levels of inaction. We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic. Pandemic is not a word to use lightly or carelessly. It's a word that, if misused, can cause unreasonable fear or unjustified acceptance that the fight is over, leading to unnecessary suffering and death.
Wow. And so certainly they are very serious words, and command that a certain sobriety be given to the intensity of this moment and these days in which we live. And the question that comes, of course, this is spirit in mind. And so it raises the question concerning theological perspectives. And we begin with the spiritual perspective because this is serious. And yet in our faith, we contextualize it with through the lens of faith. And so biblical references, first of all, to our guest, I want to start off with this, perhaps to springboard us, that the history of plagues and pandemics pretty much certainly precede us in this generation. Plagues are referenced in the Bible, and plagues, of course, starting with the Passover experience. And that was a serious season and series of plagues with different physiological manifestations, boils, and of course, the psychological impact, and the Passover. And at the same time, right about this season we're about to go into now, was a time of intense spiritual warfare, both in the Passover and even in the time of crucifixion. And so there does seem to be that this is a season of spiritual warfare for us even. And I'm reminded that Israel and Egypt did not have the exact same response to the plague. Both of them took them seriously. God gave specific instructions to his people how they should handle the season. He said, "Do you want you to be at home?" Actually, he said, "Be at home, have dinner." He said, "Put blood on the door. So I want you to recognize I'm coming through. Don't stay long." He said, "Be ready to move quickly." So he gave them very specific emergency response instructions. And at the same time, he did not want them to have the same fear. And so you could perhaps say that there's two viruses going around. There's the coronavirus, and then there's fear. And both are viral. And so we want to talk about the distinction between the two so that we can operate with them in mind. So, Dr. Shepherd, how might pandemics affect mental health as we go through this?
Well, definitely pandemics do affect our mental health. It can cause various different signs and symptoms. Number one, we've just talked about fear and anxiety. There is such a fear that is going on because it's a fear of the unknown, fear not knowing how this virus even was contracted. Coronavirus is something that I studied in medical school, is not new. but the strand is new. And so we don't have a vaccination. We're working on treatment right now. So there's a lot of fear because people do not understand where it came from, how to be able to treat it appropriately. There's a fear also because there's shortage of tests to be able to diagnose and to be able to even recognize that someone has it. So there's a lot of fear, which is why we see the grocery stores empty, which is why we see different people not wanting to go out of their homes because of that fear. It also causes grief because when you have that loss of interaction, that loss of not being able to go to your job, the loss of consistency, there is grief that is associated with that. You also have depression where people become not just distressed, but they actually may become depressed. There are some people who have already been dealing with depressed states of mind, and it can cause them to go into even a greater depression. Then the last one I'll mention is anger. There's anger even out there right now. People are angry, angry at the government, angry how do we end up here? Angry because they don't understand. There's a lot of frustration, and that can then spill over into anger. So there are, when a pandemic like this occurs, those are just some of the signs and symptoms that we need to be careful of.
Yes, absolutely. Well, what insight, and the grief piece is real because we all have ordered ways of life and patterns into which we become accustomed, even in terms of daycare and school cancellations. And we get in the habit of this is the way we get up, and we get our children into a routine, and this is how we get out of the house in the morning. And this is where daycare is. And so, Maxine, you are a specialist in this area. Could you talk a little bit to some of the things on the domestic side that should be taken into consideration?
Okay, so I'm also a licensed clinical professional counselor and approved clinical supervisor. And so part of my job is to educate not only the public, but also my supervisees and my medical staff. What we try to do is let them know that during these times, particularly after natural disasters, there's always elevated domestic violence, the potential for risk, and we should always be on alert for things like that, because where we had that partnership between the educational system and the Baltimore Health Department, they had that collaboration that we reduced a lot of truancy and things like that, and abuse is kind of we reduced a lot of the rate of children being absent from schools by having them do their immunizations and collaborating with the school and the health department to make sure that they were in school and they were getting fed. Right now, I know from my children personally, the school system did say, a few designated schools would have meals for pickup between 10 to 2. However, for families that don't have transportation, don't live in a close proximity to that school, that would present a problem. Now, if the family is already experiencing domestic violence, they're going to be cramped in this situation for 2 weeks. And we know multiparity is also an issue within the African American community. And so if mom has to go to work and she leaves her children in the available childcare that she has, we don't know what we'll be presented with. So the task I have my PRP rehab counselors doing is to make sure that they're vigilant, they're hyper vigilant when they're going out into the community, into just monitoring, checking in, just looking for those signs. Because we all know if you go to a routine appointment, as women, we are asked all the time, are you experiencing domestic violence in your home? There's always some type of barrier, someone to catch it. But now that we're encouraged not to go to the medical offices right now, who's going to be our alert system? Who's going to be our watchdogs? So that's why I'm just...
Wow. So there's layered, and it's reminiscent of, so there's several layers of wisdom here to be considered as I'm listening to both of you, because it's easy to say just use wisdom in this season, but wisdom is a layered concept. There's the epidemiological wisdom of social distancing, but then there's the psychological wisdom of isolation and feelings of isolation. Then there's the domestic situation, and many sociologists contend that in our field of work, particularly to our people of African American ethnicity, it is always layered or often layered because there are issues on top of issues. And so there's a sociological element that, so it sounds like even sometimes teachers are, if you will, operating as de facto social workers because there's much more going on than textbook education, but there's nutrition and other stuff. Yes.
You know, I'm just thinking about what is going to happen now with the social distancing.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking that already we're a society where social distancing is already happening. People want to spend more time in social media. They spend more time on their devices. And so now they're actually being made to do this. So I'm thinking like, man, are we now complicating the issue?
Yeah.
When you are causing social distancing, that's now going to exacerbate the mood, the anxiety symptoms, the loss of income that's now also going to occur when people now can't go to their job. That's going to now continue to fuel the anxiety, the anger, the depression, because people are like, well, now how am I going to pay my bills? They close down the job. So it's going to be interesting to see with the whole social distancing how people are going to respond. And I was just thinking to myself, I was like, this really is not new. It's just not going to go to a different level.
Yeah.
And I'm really seeing how our society is going to respond to this now.
Absolutely, and we've been engaging in the clergy community on how will the church respond, because it's easy to say be wise, but as church people, we live in the healthy tension between the wisdom of man and the wisdom of God. And there are scriptures that talk about God using foolish things to confound the wise. And actually, our very faith is founded on something that Paul called the foolishness of preaching, which is, it's really based on a very unscientific principle that if you believe in resurrection, you've already left the realm of science. And so we live in that healthy tension between the two. And then there's sociological studies that show that particularly African American people don't run from church, but run to faith institutions in times of crisis. And when church doors are closed, it is trauma on top of trauma, because historically oppressed people don't have the same confidence in the workings of governmental systems that can say, oh yeah, well, the community's got us. No, historically, the community has been a source of trauma. And from antebellum experience to Reconstruction to segregation through Jim Crow, right on up to Hurricane Katrina and other times of disparity of socioeconomic policy, the church has been the place to give us the strength. Right. So I've taken on the practice of trying not to condemn or berate others who have chosen to close their doors.
That's right.
History shows that sometimes some churches are closed during war and some churches are open. Some clergymen go on the battlefield with their soldiers and others don't. And so some churches, I think God is big enough to say, I can be in the world with the culture and cooperate, and yet at the same time have some churches that are open, and he's leading different leaders in different ways based on the needs of the people. So what do you think? You're an elder as well.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yes, sir. Well, consistency is the main thing. I preach consistency, whether it be in profession, whether it be over the pulpit, in my practice. Consistency is what we have to get back to, continue to maintain. When I'm working with parents, I tell them, even if you're going to be mean, just be mean consistently so that a child will know what to expect from you. People laugh when I say that, but I really do mean that. When in times like this, people go to places where they can meditate and take their mind off of things. I was just sharing with you earlier that the casinos are still open. Yeah. So now when people are in distress, they're going to try to go gamble their money away because they want to make sure that they can take their mind off of whatever they're dealing with. And again, I'm not knocking that, but we want to make sure that we have some healthy ways to cope. Some of us don't have that money to go to spend at the casinos. So we need to make sure that we have healthy ways to cope with what is going on. And in the Black community, the church has been a stalwart, has been one of the paramount pillars of the community. And I thank God for the church, because I would not be here today if it was not for the church. And I thank God for parents who kept me in church consistently. having trouble saying that word, but I'm just saying that I was there when we had snowstorms. I was there when we had hurricanes. And even here, since I've been to Baltimore, I praise God for having a good church that will remain open. It may not always be at the times where we want it to be, but we are there when we are when the doors of the church are open, when we need for them to be there, whether it be for prayer, Sunday school, whatever it might be. And so I just thank God for a consistent church and for a consistent God.
Yes, and perhaps that's a message to encourage pastors, because we're all learning through this, and rather than celebrate our perfections or imperfections, let's celebrate our intentions to be there. Some churches are closing for safety, and some churches are opening for safety.
That's right.
Because hope is important in times like these. And rather than berate each other, maybe we should celebrate God. Reinhold Niebuhr is famous in theology for saying that there's Christ in culture, there's Christ with the culture, and sometimes Christ is against the culture and over the culture. And he can use different ministries at different times to represent all of those perspectives. And so we celebrate whatever the Lord has led you to do. We want to come back with some solutions and suggestions for this time. But first, Eric Waddell is coming to tell us to put our trust in the Lord.
Trust in you, you always just what to do. Anytime, any place. Your love has never changed. So I put my trust. Oh, I put my trust. Oh, I put my trust in you. Oh, I will put my trust.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Elder Eric Waddell and the Abundant Life Singers, for reminding us that in times like these, we have to put our trust in the Lord. Listen, we want to spend these last 5 minutes talking about some recommendations. And so, Sister Galloway, would you suggest some things that families should consider during this time?
So during this time, I would like to emphasize that you're right when you said that the church and the schools provide some type of respite for these children and these families. As we are going into this mandated quarantine status, I would encourage people to reach out to their family members that have small children, that have women that are suffering with this type of problem. Just be vigilant. They can give you nonverbal cues that lets you know that everything isn't necessarily okay, because we know that there's a high correlation between poverty and lower education.
Yes.
And substance abuse.
Absolutely.
So because we know all of these factors, these psychosocial stressors that can be, elevated during this time.
Sure.
We want to be vigilant, and we want to reach out, and we want to network with those families. One thing I would like to recommend, because my program is still functioning, we have the psychiatric rehabilitation program. Those are your PRP rehab counselors that they're still in operation. So they're still coming. They can't form groups, but they can still come to your home to offer and lend support, especially in finding resources and entitlements that will help you in the community when the church or the educational system can't reach out. They can be that bridge.
Thank you. And Dr. Shepherd, you mentioned casinos, which caused me to think about behaviors and acting out in these times of isolation. And it's interesting because casinos are a place of risk. And I'm reminded of a great sermon by Dr. Joseph Ratcliffe about faith being a calculated risk. And so there are healthy engagements. And can you talk about some healthy behaviors?
Yes, sir. So let's talk about just 5 quick things. Number one, I mentioned it earlier, consistency, which brings along a sense of normalcy. Make sure that you are balancing caution with not going into hysteria. So balance that caution versus hysteria.
Yeah.
So number one, consistency, sense of normalcy. Number two, avoid excessive exposure to media coverage. I know we love the news. We love the different news outlets. But give it a break. They're going to continue to talk about it. You can not watch it for 6 hours and you pick right back on up and nothing has changed. So avoid excessive exposure to media coverage.
Yeah.
Continue to listen to the radio though. All right. Number 3, anxiety reducing techniques. Deep breaths, stretch, meditate. Learn how to do those things. Number 4, share your concerns with your family and friends. Maintain healthy relationships. Even when you're isolated like this, you need to talk. You need to be able to communicate. So make sure you do that. And then number 5, practice good stress management. Exercise. Get out there. And the weather is still nice in most places. Get out there, get a walk. But take your mind off of the things that are going on. So those are some of the things that I would recommend for us to do during this particular time.
Absolutely. What good recommendations and advice. And listen, of course, we are praying for all pastors and churches that are ministering to our communities in this season. And can you very quickly just give advice, contact information in about 10 seconds each or 15 seconds? Man, we need more time.
Well, you can find me at Redeem Healthcare Medical Systems. You can find them there on 3240 Bel Air Road. I don't have the number on the top of my head, but you know where to find me.
Jonathan Shepherd, I'm employed at Hope Health Systems, 410-265-8737 or drjonathanshepard.com.
And of course, you can reach me at CGR Ministries. You can look me up on any of the social media platforms, or you can meet me at the Tabernacle of the Lord. We are a family of faith growing in grace. Listen, our closing word on this matter is going to come from a little bit of J.J. Hairston, who says, who has the final say? Jehovah has the final say on Spirit and Mind.
Make some noise in here! The final say.
Jehovah has the final say.
Who has the final say?
Jehovah has the final say.
No matter